Today on Inside Utah Politics, Utah legislative session. From illegal immigration to education, more on issues that are going to take center stage as the session kicks off this week. Plus, public lands. Utah's bid to take over control of millions of acres of federal land hits a harsh roadblock, what the Supreme Court rules. And tax cuts. What the Utah Taxpayers Association has to say on the tax cuts proposed by Utah lawmakers.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Jordan Tracy. Let's go inside Utah politics. We begin our program with our eyes on the Utah legislative session, now just 2 days away. Ahead of that, the Utah House majority took some time to announce its priorities for this year. Some of the top issues they plan to tackle are education, housing affordability, and infrastructure development, including energy and water. Illegal immigration is another issue that lawmakers say that they'd like to tackle.
And you think about 3 million plus people coming across the border, again, that we know of. That is the size of the state of Utah.
That's, of course, only half the picture. Utah may be a Republican supermajority, but the Democrats in opposition can have a big impact on shaping the policies that make it to the governor's desk. That's why I'm joined today by Democrat House Minority Leader Angelo Romero. Representative Romero, thank you for joining Inside Politics.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, let's talk about it. We had another election. Some seats have changed hands, but largely we have that Republican trifecta in the state. How do you go about setting your party's agenda under these circumstances?
You do the best you can, and you provide that alternative voice, and so that's who we're there to be. And hopefully people wake up and they're like, maybe next time I vote for a Democrat.
So what are some of those priorities that you have from the minority side here? What are some of the things that you're looking to tackle this legislative session?
I think we're looking to tackle a lot of the things that the majority are, because the things we want to tackle are basic issues that most Utahns want to see. Housing availability is huge, and it depends on where you sit on the income bracket. If you're on the lower end, you want affordable housing. If you're on the higher end, you want first home buyer plans. And so we have to be a little bit more creative on how we're going to do that. And how do we build for density? And how do we build for density and not just do apartments? How do we do home ownership in the situation we are? Utah is growing, and it's growing fast, and we have to be able to do that infrastructure. So that's one area that the state has to work with the cities, different municipalities on.
Yeah, and with that housing affordability issue, you have, homelessness kind of plays into a part of this. How do you kind of find compromise in what you said? There might be a difference in approach there. Is it just housing affordability, building more houses, first-time home buyer type things, or availability for folks of low income?
I'll use the speaker's favorite word, all of the above. And one of the things we really have to tackle is when people are experiencing homelessness in Utah, and many of those individuals are in Salt Lake City, and not all of those people were from Salt Lake City. They're from across the state of Utah, and so the state needs to work hand in hand with Mayor Mendenhall and the council, but also with the people who are up there at the legislature, like myself, that also represent Salt Lake City, that were elected by the people of Salt Lake City.
So take us kind of behind the curtain here for the folks at home who may not, see the politics play out,
Yeah.
Okay? How do you kind of go about influencing the agenda from your side of things in the legislature?
You have to have relationships with your colleagues. I could be on social media and just tearing them down, or I could have those conversations with the speaker. I talk to the speaker almost every day. We don't always agree on policy, but we have a respectful relationship, and there's been times where he's changed my mind. It's very few, but there's been times where I've changed his mind, and so it's having those honest conversations and continuing to have those honest conversations, and hopefully taking it before our colleagues. I mean, the one concern I have with the agenda of the majority in the House, because I think it's more of a House agenda, is immigration. Immigration is a federal issue. I'm the president of the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislators. I was elected by my peers from across the country to represent them, and I worked closely with the Biden administration. There was some work we were doing when it came to securing the border. The president-elect told them not to, he killed the bill. And so when you have someone going against the interest of all Americans and people who are striving to have a better life, it's very frustrating. So we'll see what happens with this incoming administration, but more importantly, Congress needs to get off their hands and do something about comprehensive immigration reform.
And you brought that up, that you know, it's something that's brought up in the Utah State House side of things, but it is a federal issue. You know, what role does the state play in an issue like immigration? Is there a role for your legislature to do something to either aid whatever the federal rollout is going to be, or even push back what the federal rollout might be?
Depends on what the federal rollout's going to be. I hear a lot of rhetoric. And my concern, and I've raised this concern with the speaker, and I've raised this concern with the governor, is the way we frame immigration. When we talk about public safety and crime, it's very different than talking about comprehensive immigration reform. Are there situations where it might overlap? Yes. But when the majority had their press conference and they're talking about securing the border, and Utah's a border state, we are not a border state. We do not border Mexico. And I think it's really critical when we're talking about the fentanyl crisis. We look at opioids and we look at what we're doing here in the United States of America and why people are addicted to fentanyl and opioids and where it started. And so I think it's easy to scapegoat a group of individuals, but I think we need to look at ourselves and say, when we're doing this, when we're repeating some of this language, how are we putting people in compromising situations that have contributed to our economy here? I'd like my colleagues to know, like, if they go about with many of their thoughts, and this is not all my colleagues, but some that have talked about it, with what they call mass deportation that's coming from the national level. Who's going to build that museum in back of the Capitol? Who's going to be providing the services for many of the places we shop and go?
Interesting perspective there. I do want to move on to some of your bills personally. Last year, when we covered last session, there was a bill that you put forth limiting the use of polygraph tests for those who were victims of sexual assault. Where do you see the future of that bill? Is that something you're going to bring up again? And how do you think it will fare this legislative session?
I think it'll pass this legislative session. And the reason why we're doing the bill is because we want to have access to more federal funding. The bill got stuck on the third reading calendar in the Senate the last day of the session. And if anyone follows Utah politics, they know when the clock strikes midnight, everything disappears. So
I'm learning that.
Disappeared.
This is going to be my first session, so
Yeah.
I'm learning a little bit about that.
But I presented the bill during the interim. It passed our interim committee, which is a mix of senators and representatives with nobody opposing it. So I'm hoping the bill goes straight to the House floor, or we have the same conversation we had before, and I just don't really see a lot of opposition to it. And it's needed just for the federal funds, and when you're looking at a polygraph exam, those can't be used in a court of law, and there are other ways to interview someone who's experienced trauma.
Sure, okay. Another bill we want to talk about is HB 101, which would require impartial titles and ballot analysis for a proposed constitutional amendment. Obviously, we had those amendments that were highly controversial that came up in a special session. Talk a little bit about this bill. Do you expect this to come up, and had any conversations with the majority about this bill?
That'll be an interesting conversation if the bill is pulled out of the Rules Committee. I think maybe it was this past session or the session before, the language was changed, and I'm just asking for it to go back the way it used to be, where our general counsel and our policy analysts write the language for the ballot versus the speaker and the president.
How important is that? You know, we talked about it when these amendments came up here on this show about the language of an amendment and how important it is to be clear what it represents for the voter. Is this kind of why you're bringing this up, to make sure that when an amendment is written for a ballot, it is clear what the voter is actually voting for?
It should be clear, and it shouldn't be based on party affiliation. And a lot of people, there was a survey done for Utahns, and if they would have read the language as written, they would have voted for the ballot initiative, even though it's something maybe they didn't agree with. And what's really interesting is when it wasn't a ballot initiative, the difference between a ballot initiative and when we go into special session to put something on the ballot, it is harder because we've made it difficult for a citizen initiative to go through, but it's very easy for us to call ourselves into a special session because we changed that law during COVID and be able to put something on the ballot. And it's more likely for the legislature to put something on the ballot than it is for a citizen initiative. So that's why I think it's so important that we have an unbiased opinion on how we create that language so that we're being fair to the voter.
Well, Representative Romero, I know this is the busy time. This is where you guys start working and go through all of these, and I'm told it's a rapid-fire kind of stretch here.
It's a 45-day roller coaster ride. You think you're going down a hill, but then all of a sudden you find yourself going up a hill.
Fair enough. Representative Romero, thank you so much for joining Inside Utah Politics.
Thank you for having me.
All right, well, still to come, folks. Utah's legislative session begins later this month, January 21st. That is Tuesday. ABC4 will be live from the Capitol Rotunda with comprehensive coverage of everything you need to know. That'll start on ABC4 News at midday on January 21st. Still ahead on Inside Utah Politics, public lands lawsuit. What the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Utah's lawsuit to take over control of millions of acres of federal land. And also coming up, Inauguration Day. Preparations are underway as President-elect Donald Trump prepares to take office. Welcome back. Utah's bid to take over control of millions of acres of federal land has hit a harsh roadblock. The Supreme Court rejected the state's lawsuit. Our Southern Utah correspondent Cannon Seacrest is tracking reaction and what happens next.
Utah's push to gain control over millions of acres of federally managed land has stopped for now. The Supreme Court declined to hear the case filed last summer, a decision celebrated by conservation groups. The state argued that local management would provide better oversight and address issues like forest fires and resource use. However, environmentalists warned that Utah's lawsuit could pave the way for privatization and resource extraction.
Well, it's an exciting day. At its core, that was really seeking to undo the Western system of federal lands. There are hundreds of millions of acres of these lands across the Western United States and Alaska that, had Utah succeeded, would be in the crosshairs for really sale to the highest bidder.
Utah House Speaker Mike Schultz, however, says the fight isn't over as the state explores other legal paths.
We knew it was a little bit of a long shot in asking to go directly to the Supreme Court. More than likely, I think you'll see us just work through the normal process and just file a lawsuit in federal courts and see where that goes.
Schultz also criticized the management of federal lands, saying the current system has left Utah vulnerable to wildfire risk.
You look at what's going on in California right now, Utah is primed in many areas to deal with to end up with some of the same things because they're not actively managing these areas.
Conservation groups, including the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, disagree. They call the decision a win for the protection of Utah's iconic landscapes.
We know the Utahns care about federal lands, and it's the reason why so many of us live here. We work, we recreate on these lands. They're sort of a core part of why we live in Utah, why Westerners live here, why Utah and many states in the American West are the envy of the nation.
The Supreme Court's decision may end this phase of the legal fight, but the debate of public lands in Utah is far from over. As the state plans their next move, questions remain about the future of these millions of acres. Reporting in Southern Utah, Cannon Seacrest, ABC4 News.
Cannon, thank you. The U.S. Supreme Court also denied an appeal from a former Utah Representative Phil Lymans over his claim that Governor Spencer Cox should not have qualified for the ballot. It marks the end of Lymans' months-long legal efforts to overturn Governor Cox's win. Lymans has claimed that Utah's dual path to get on the ballot, the convention and the signature route, was unconstitutional. In a statement, Lymans thanked supporters and the court, but signaled his fight might not be over. The Utah Education Association is sharing its plans for the upcoming legislative session. The big push is to oppose any additional funding for private and religious school vouchers. They say UEA has had a resolution since 1971 opposing vouchers, insisting they harm public school students.
It's very disingenuous to say that you can have a voucher program simultaneously running at the same time that you're funding public education, because we know that our students in public schools have needs that aren't being met, and we are protectors of the promise of public education.
They say they will also prioritize funding for staffing solutions, teaching supplies, and behavioral health resources. President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration is just a day away, and D.C. is busy preparing. From Secret Service to the FBI to the Capitol Police, agencies are putting security plans into action to get ready for the event. Washington, D.C. correspondent Hannah Brandt has the details.
All around Washington, D.C., you can see signs that the city is preparing for inauguration.
Every 4 years, our city supports the peaceful transition of power. We are proud of that responsibility.
But those leading security for the inauguration say this year poses larger challenges.
What's different is we are in a higher threat environment.
And Secret Service Special Agent Matt McCool says they've responded by beefing up this inauguration's security plan. That includes setting up security screening checkpoints, fencing, and concrete barriers. Plus, they'll have surveillance drones and thousands of officers from various law enforcement teams on patrol.
This all-star team is working to keep everyone safe while minimizing disruptions to the public as much as possible.
The Secret Service is expecting hundreds of thousands of people here in the nation's capital on Inauguration Day. Some in celebration, others in protest. And they're setting up 30 miles of fencing like this to try to keep things under control.
We're hopeful that that'll keep any of the protests from getting too close to the Capitol.
The FBI says so far they've not identified any credible threats to the inauguration. But Capitol Police Chief J. Thomas Manger says they're keeping a close watch.
Biggest threat, I think, for all of us remains the lone actor.
He says just last week at services honoring late President Jimmy Carter, police stopped 2 different threats from lone actors. With just a week to go to inauguration, law enforcement leaders say they're ready.
We are 100% confident in the plan that we have put in place for this inauguration, that the public and our protectees will be safe.
In Washington, I'm Hannah Brandt.
Coming up, possible tax cuts coming. What the Utah Taxpayers Association has to say about the proposed tax cuts.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Welcome back to Inside Utah Politics. We're continuing our preview of the 2025 general session and turning our focus to taxes. The governor and top Republican leaders have promised to continue to find new ways to cut taxes. So here to explain and how they're going to do that, I'm joined by Billy Hesterman. He is the president of the Utah Taxpayers Association. Welcome to Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's start with this. You know, you guys have had your legislative outlook this week. We heard from big decision makers, from legislative leaders to the governor himself. What are some of the things that you've heard?
So we've heard that a tax cut is coming. It's where's it going to be is the big question that we're going to be watching throughout the whole session. But it's that we've set aside $165 million to give a tax cut to Utahns. And now it's, are we going to put it in the Social Security bucket? Are we going to cut income taxes? Or maybe we'll do a little of both.
Yeah, you mentioned Social Security. A big proposal this time around has been ending taxes on Utah's senior Social Security income. The governor called it one of the most popular things, but then there's some people who don't seem to think it's very popular. So could we see a compromise on this, or do you think it'll ultimately win out?
If we're looking at the tea leaves right now, I do think it shows there might be some type of compromise to say, let's move that threshold of, instead of $75,000 of your Social Security exempt, maybe move it up to $100,000. And then lower the income tax rate, maybe not a full 10 basis points, but maybe 5 basis points. Something that kind of gives everybody a little something to go home with to feel happy at the end of the 45 days.
Sure, and the governor mentioned about the growing senior population in Utah. It's a growing population across the country. So do you think this is an issue? I mean, obviously it's a big proposal that'll end up being kind of a big ticket item this session here.
Certainly. I mean, it's estimated to be around $143 million to pay for that cut. If we went the full path of what the governor is asking for, it would mean close to $1,000 to each individual that would benefit from that, or each household. And so it's something that's significant and has to be looked at. And I don't envy the legislators being in this position of having to pick between one of those two tax cuts, because one certainly focuses on your senior citizens who are traditionally voters.
Yeah.
And so they want to go that way because they know they're going to find voters and benefit from that. But also, if you're looking at what is a good tax policy principle, you want to broaden the base, lower the rate. Taking the Social Security income is not broadening the base of your income tax base. It's actually shrinking it. So maybe you do look at it and say, we really just want to lower it and give everyone in the state a modest tax break for the upcoming year.
And taxes were, a big part of these ballot amendments that were there last year. Amendment A, freeing up income tax to be spent on other things other than education, and ending the sales tax on groceries in the state. That was blocked by a court before voters could weigh in. Do you see the sales tax cut being revived in any way, in a way that would be easier to pass?
Not this year. I think maybe down the road that might be something we'll look at. I think at the moment, though, there was a lot of polling out there that showed that there were some tough questions to be asked and things to be figured out with that. So right now, I think we're on a pause on that, and we'll move forward and look at it in the future years.
And also the issue of income tax. Now, it's earmarked for education, but obviously it was something that trying to change there on those amendments. There are proposals to end or modify the earmark due to legislature consistency, lowering the income tax. So what do you think about the possibility of eliminating the state income tax altogether? Is that something that could move forward? Do you see the legislature kind of taking a particular path on this issue?
What we have to look at are what's happening in the states across the country. There are a lot of states right now, blue states and red states, that are cutting their income tax rate. And so we do want to remain competitive. We do want to make sure that we're a state that isn't standing out going, well, we'd love to go to Utah, but if we have our workers go there, it's going to cost them X amount more. We want to be on the, the bottom end of that where they go, well, we do know that Utah's a low tax state. We're going to have happy employees there. We're going to do well as a business there. And so we want to keep that in mind. Getting rid of the income tax fully, while it sounds great and it's a wonderful political talking point, there are some hurdles that we'd have to overcome. There is just a baseline of money that government needs to operate to provide the services that we enjoy. If we want schools and police and fire and our state parks that we all enjoy, there's got to be a way to pay for them. And so if we get rid of the income tax, it really only is going to increase the pressure we put on the property tax and the sales tax. And if we as a people decide we're okay with that, then let's consider it. But right now, I think we all kind of like that three-legged stool, even if maybe we make one of those legs a little bit shorter. And when I say three-legged, I mean the sales, property, and income taxes. Maybe we make one of those a little bit shorter, and the chair might just kind of lean to one side a little bit more. But I think that's the path we'll end up with more than just fully sawing one of them off.
Do you see a future where the income tax would no longer be just earmarked for education?
I do think that's a strong possibility, and I think that's a good thing. I think if we allow our elected officials really to have the handcuffs taken off of them and be able to put the money where it needs to go, I personally believe education will still get as much as they get now, if not more, because every legislator has run on a platform of we're going to fund education. We're going to make sure our teachers and our students get the best they need. And they're going to keep that promise. They want to come back the next year and keep doing what they're doing. And so if we take the handcuffs off of that earmark and allow them just to move the money where it needs to go, it gives them flexibility in the budget to help do some of the other things they want to accomplish, but it will also still allow them to fund the education pot the way they'd like to.
All right, Billy Hesterman, thank you so much for breaking down to the brass tacks of things.
Thanks for having me.
Did you like what I did there? Thank you. I tried, be a little clever here and there. All right, thank you so much. Stay with us. More Inside Utah Politics is coming up after the break. Well, that does it for today's Inside Utah Politics. Don't forget, if you have any local political stories you'd like to see, make sure to reach out. You can email InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow along with me on social media on X @JordanTracyTV, and on Instagram, just search for Jordan Tracy. Find ABC4 on social media to follow along no matter where you are. And while you're at it, download the ABC4 News app. We are always on. Thank you for being with us, everyone. We'll see you next week when we go Inside Utah Politics.